How is everyone?
Fine. So, good evening to everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of Satyashoda Collective for today's talk. Satyashoda Collective has been organizing series of lectures, which is a part of the Dalit food culture series. And 3 months back, we have announced call for papers on Dalit food cultures. We have received good response from the uh, scholars across India and even abroad. So we got very enthusiasm from that response, and we thought of to have a open public discussion on some of the important themes. And for that, uh, we have requested the contributors to present their uh, papers, which are in progress. Today, we have with us two speakers, Dr. Santosh Juvvaka and Dr. Ratan Sarkar, and they are going to speak on a title, When Food Becomes Caste, the Hidden Hierarchies of the Taste in India. So now I request Dr. Anand Kumar to introduce the today's speakers.
Yeah, very good evening, everybody. It's an honor for me to introduce such speakers who have this vast profile in terms of academics and administrative possibilities as well. Yeah. So, as Dr. Chandraya has spoken about the series that we are organizing. So in this series, we particularly deal with the food practices and the traditional knowledge of the Dalit communities, or to some sort of a culture that has always been subsided at the margin. So in order to accommodate this inclusive approach, we are just organizing all these things. And in this is, I think, in this series, this is a 7th lecture. And as Dr. Chandraya sir has spoken, that today's speakers are Dr. Santosh Juvvaka uh, from from Assam, and another speaker, Ratan Sarkar ji, is also from the same Assam region.
Okay.
So yeah. So Dr. Santosh Juvvaka is an assistant professor at the Department of Public Administration at Assam Don Bosco University, India. He earned his PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, where his doctoral research examined Dalit political representation in the 14th Lok Sabha. He is UGC NET qualified and also holds a diploma in journalism and mass communications, reflecting his engagement with both rigorous academic scholarship and public communications. Prior to joining Assam Don Bosco University, Dr. Santosh served as a faculty member at Zakir Hussain College, New Delhi, which comes under University of Delhi. He currently teaches courses in public policy, governance, and human rights. His research interest encompasses caste and social exclusion, political participation, governance, and policy analysis. He has contributed to several research.
Sorry, Kumar. I just wanted to say I'm very sorry I'm late. I got 5 minutes late because I have problem with my stomach. Is this okay?
Is it okay? Is it
Hey,
okay?
hey, please don't interrupt.
I request all the participants, please mute your audio
Please,
so that
everyone, please don't.
Okay,
Not-
I'm very sorry.
Yeah. So,
Please
Dr. San-
don't.
Dr. San- Dr. Santosh sir has contributed to several research projects funded by ICSSR and ICHSR and has published widely in reputed national and international journals and edited volumes as well. In addition to his academic work, Dr. Santosh actively mentors students in field-based initiatives across North India, Northeast India, integrating research with community engagement. His scholarship bridges theoretical inquiry and applied governance with a sustained commitment to social justice, participatory policy processes, and inclusive development. In the series of this speaker, the second speaker is Dr. Ratan Sarkar, who serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Education, School of Humanities and Social Science, Tezpur University, Assam. Before joining to Tezpur University, he held the position of assistant professor for nearly 7 years in the Department of Teachers Training at Prabhat Kumar College, Kontai, West Bengal, where he provided substantial academic and institutional leadership. He has also served as guest faculty at the National Institute for Empowerment of Persons with Intellectual Disabilities, Regional Centers, Kolkata. Dr. Sarkar earned his PhD in education from Pondicherry University, India. Dr. Sarkar had had a MPhil and MEd in special education from Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Education and Research Institute, Baylor Math. He also holds MA in Education and Technology from Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai. His academic journey begins with a BA in Special Education from Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and a BA in English Honors from Siliguri College, West Bengal. He has published widely in Sage, Springer, Routledge, and Wiley journals, authored books, and registered patents, and led several research projects under Ministry of Education, Government of India, and Government of West Bengal as well. Bridging, bridging teaching, research, and policy advocacy, Dr. Sarkar's academic engagement are marked by a deep commitment to advancing inclusive, equitable, and technologically enabled learning ecosystem that promote both academic excellence and social justice. So now the floor is open to the speakers. Please, the floor is open to you, Dr. Ratan Sarkar and Santosh ji.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Dr. Anand Kumar, for the kind introduction, and dear Professor Chandra Gopani. Thank you for this opportunity. We both, my co-author and we, appreciate your initiative of starting this very wonderful series of lectures as part of the proposed book and organized by the Satyashodha Collective. So we are grateful for this opportunity. So as we mentioned, our title of this paper is When Food Become Cost. Hope I'm audible. My voice is clear.
Yeah, Santosh.
Yeah. So the title is When Food Becomes Cost, the Hidden Hierarchies of Taste in India. So this study of food and especially the research in social sciences is surrounding around the one of the most social category and its social life in the 20th century, and it continues today. That particular social life, which is the Dalits. So the research on Dalits is predominantly occupying various domains, and whereas new domains are being added subsequently in recent times. So one such sphere of life, the Dalit life, is the food. The food research is, though limited, but emerging in a very profound ways. So in that context, it becomes very important that this particular initiative taken by Professor Chandraya Gopani and Anand Kumar
I am sorry, my friend waiting in the list.
deserves special appreciation, and is going to contribute the academic knowledge on this particular aspects. So having said that, let me come to the topic we are about to present. The food as a fundamental human need transcends its biological function to become a profound site of social regulation, identity formation, and power contestations. So it's not only in India, but everywhere we can study these aspects. So when it comes to India, the castes, one of the world's most enduring systems of hierarchical social stratification, finds one of its most intimate and persistent expressions in the domain of food. So dietary practices, kitchen arrangements, commensarity rules, and the taste preferences are not neutral cultural artifacts, but powerful mechanism through which caste hierarchies are being reproduced, disciplined, and occasionally challenged. So while scholarly attention has long focused on overt manifestations of caste, such as occupational segregation, spatial exclusion, and ritual purity pollution codes. So the mundane yet insidious ways in which food encodes and naturalizes caste-based notions of superiority and inferiority.
I'm sorry. Can you please let in one my friend because he don't join the meeting. He a little bit late. Please let him in. Thank you.
Yeah, that's settled, no? Thanks. So the food encodes and naturalizes caste-based notions of superiority, and inferiority remains relatively underexplored. So therefore, this particular initiative in that context becomes very important. So as part of this collective endeavor, our particular chapter seeks to address this gap by foregrounding food as critical technology of caste power, exposing the symbolic violence embedded in culinary norms, and highlighting emergent forms of Dalit culinary assertion, with particular emphasis on lived experiences from Assam and Bengal. So historically, caste has constructed elaborate food hierarchies that mirror and reinforce social stratification. So ancient texts such as Manusmriti, Dharmashastras codified dietary prescriptions that privileged vegetarianism, certain grains, and preparation methods associated with the so-called upper caste, especially the Brahmins, as marks of purity and civilization, while stigmatizing meat consumption, especially beef, and fermented or strong-smelling foods as polluting and even considered as barbaric, quote unquote. So these normative frameworks were not merely ideological. They translated into everyday practices of exclusion, restrictions on commensality, the shared meals, segregation of cooking spaces, control over water sources, and surveillance of lower caste food habits. So such mechanisms endured that and ensured that the caste differentiated not only labor and space, but also the bodies and dignity itself. So even in contemporary India, it's not an old story. So in contemporary times, these dynamics persist in subtle and overt forms, ranging from hostel mess segregations and workplace lunchroom microaggressions to public controversies over bee bans and food-related violence. So we have seen in recent times various instances of even lynching, the allegations of beef consumption, and recurrent reports of Dalit students being denied entry to midday meal schemes underscores the continued vitality of castes ideology in ostensibly secular and modern spaces. Supposed to be these are modern spaces. So this particular chapter where we argue that food is far from a private matter of taste or nutrition. So it operates as a technology of power that naturalizes caste hierarchies while simultaneously serving as a terrain for resistance. So our study drawing on the theoretical contributions of Bordeaux, the notion of tastes as a marker of distinction and symbolic violence, alongside Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's critique of caste as graded inequality. So we conceptualize culinary practices as sites where dominant groups impose their norms as universal, thereby rendering subordinate food waste deviant or shameful. Yet, food also enables counter-hegemonic assertions. So Dalit communities across India are increasingly reclaiming stigmatized foods such as beef, pork, offal, fermented preparations as symbols of cultural pride. So political identity and collective resistance. So this dual character of food as both coercive as well as emancipatory makes it an indispensable lens for understanding the persistence and contestations of castes in the contemporary India. So while existing literature, the scholarship on caste, on food politics, as centered on Western and Southern India. So this particular study, so we try to shift our focus to the relatively understudied regions of Assam and Bengal in the Eastern India. So these regions offer critique insight due to their distinct ethnic compositions, the histories of migration, and overlapping castes and tribe dynamics, which makes it more interesting. So in Bengal, for instance, scheduled caste communities such as Namashudras, Pondra have long navigated Brahminical vegetarian hegemony while maintaining meat-centric cuisine rooted in resourcefulness and riverine ecologies. So whereas in Assam, fishing and agrarian scheduled caste groups like Karibartha, Mahara, and Ira face similar pressure amid a broader Assamese culture emphasis on fish and occasional folk, yet experience stigma around specific preparations deemed lowly. So by foregrounding unexplored local examples such as blood fry, rakta baza, and offal curries in Bengal's Dalit households, or smoked pork with black sesame, oma bedor, and fermented fish products among Assam's marginalized communities. So this particular study illuminates how regional culinary habits connect to broader socio-cultural, economic, and political dimensions of Dalit life. So these practices reflect not only survival strategies born of economic marginalization, but also the acts of cultural continuity and defense against imposed vegetarian norms. So in this background, the paper or study is structured as follows. So first, we defined key terms to establish conceptual clarity. So this is followed by an engagement with the theoretical framework, including Ambedkarite thought, purity pollution binaries, and cultural hegemony. So leading to the proposal of an original conception, what we call culinary casteism. So when it comes to methodological aspects, so we adopted interdisciplinary approach combining textual analysis with ethnographic insights from both the states. Subsequent sections present data analysis of historical hierarchies, everyday lived experiences, and we try to emphasize on gender and regional specificity and emerging counter assertions. So finally, the findings highlights the material symbolic consequences of food-based exclusion alongside the transformative potential of Dalit food practices. Finally, we conclude by arguing for a cultural reimaginating of tastes and purity as essential to dismantling the caste system. So in era of growing food movements, urban culinary entrepreneurship, and digital assertion of identity, understanding the politics of food offers critical insights into both the resilience of castes and the pathways towards egalitarian futures. Through the lens of Dalit culinary worlds in Assam and Bengal, so our study contributes to the broader conversations on social equality in South Asia at broader level, to be specific, in India. So some of the conceptual frames we used in this particular study are caste hierarchy, no need to elaborate much on for this particular audience, and food politics, culinary stigma, and we mentioned the concept of purity pollution, taste politics, and the food assertion, Dalit food culture. So on the basis of these conceptual clarifications at the outset, we try to progress with the theoretical background, where we discuss various theoretical contributions of existing literature. On that basis, we built our study to argue our original proposed theoretical framework, which is culinary casteism. So we begin with Ambedkar's thought and everyday caste practices. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's critique of caste as a system of graded inequality provided the foundational analytical lens for this particular study. So where Ambedkar's conceptualization is caste not simply as a division of labor, but as a hierarchical division of laborers, wherein social worth is fixed at birth and enforced through endogamy, ritual discipline, and everyday humiliations. And the second theoretical position, so this particular theoretical position of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, we adopt this particular framework in the context of Assam and Bengal, where Ambedkar's assertions are expressed through reclamation of stigmatized food such as beef and pork. So these acts are reducible to not reducible to cultural preference alone, but emerge at the intersections of economic necessity, ecological availability, and political identity. So access to affordable protein insects with the assertions of dignity, turning consumption itself into a form of embodied resistance against the Brahminical vegetarian norms. Another dominant theoretical position when one study about caste and hierarchies are the purity pollution binary and its limits. So the Louis Dumont's formulation of caste in his Homo hierarchicus remains foundational to understanding the symbolic logic of food hierarchy. So he theorized caste as organized through the opposition between purity and pollution, positioning the Brahmin as the ritual ideal whose vegetarianism and their practices as morally superior, while the meat handling and animal slaughter are relegated to ritually degraded groups. So this particular framework in case of Assam and Bengal, so this binary operates through subtle yet coercive forms of surveillance. So the preparations of beef curries, what you call in Bengali, goru mangsho, in Bengal, or pork dishes in Assamese households often invite scrutiny, the social anxiety, and the spatial regulation. So Dalit persistence in consuming these foods destabilizes the purity regime by exposing its arbitrariness and by refusing assimilation into dominant caste respectability. Another theoretical position which helps this particular study is stigma, taste, and symbolic violence. So the theories of stigma and symbolic violence further illuminates how food functions as an instrument of caste discipline. Evolving government's conceptualization of stigma explains how certain bodily practices, including eating, becomes markers of moral deficiency. Food habits thus attach a spoiled identity to Dalit communities, reinforcing social distance even in ostensibly modern or secular spaces like schools, universities, the modern offices, etc. And Bourdieu's theory of distinction deepens this analysis by locating tastes within structures of cultural capital. So applied these two theoretical positions to the food cultures in this particular region, so where Dalit cuisines become targets of aesthetic devaluation. So in Bengal, offal-based dishes, the products of thrift and historical exclusion from the clean cuts of meat are read as evidence of backwardness rather than structural deprivation. So whereas in Assam, fermented foods and preservation techniques reflect ecological knowledge and survival strategies, yet are frequently considered as uncivilized. So whereas scholars argues such culinary stigmatization constitutes symbolic violence precisely because it is misrecognized as common sense. So then it follows to another theoretical position, which is cultural hegemony and subaltern historiography. Antonio Gramsci's and Ranjit Guhat's contribution towards the narrating history and cultural dominance will help us in this particular study by emphasizing on the lived experiences and autobiographical studies, oral narratives, and community memory, which reveals food not as marginal detail, but as a key archive of suffering and survival. So these narratives document hunger, humiliation, and exclusion, while simultaneously foregrounding cooking, sharing, and eating as acts of solidarity and resistance. So on the basis of these existing theoretical positions, we try to develop original conceptualization, what we call what we argue in this particular paper is the culinary casteism. So by synthesizing the above mentioned theoretical positions, so we in this study advance the concept of culinary casteism to analyze as an analytical tool to analyze the conception of how food operates as a multi-dimensional technology of caste power. The culinary casteism refers to the process through which dietary practices encode purity pollution hierarchies, how it produces stigma through taste politics, and sustain cultural hegemony via everyday surveillance and moral judgment. So this particular analytical tool, crucially, this particular framework is dialectical in nature rather than deterministic. It's not one-way process. Rather, it's dialectical in nature. So while food functions as an instrument of domination, so Dalit culinary practices also generate counter-hegemonic possibilities. So through persistence, adaptation, and reclamation, the regional cuisines in Assam and Bengal become the sites where dignity, memory, and political consciousness are reasserted. The food, therefore, emerges not only as a medium of caste oppression, but also as a terrain of struggle. So where alternative social imaginaries are continually forced. So that's where we attempt our humble initiative here to contribute to the existing knowledge on food studies. So the regional when it comes to the regional specificities and various food practices of Dalit communities. So in case of Assam, the dishes like Oma Bedo, which is the smoked fork with black sesame or alkaline ingredients, very often features dried vegetables. And the another food item, which is napam, the smoked and fermented fish paste, embody adaptation to revenant scarcity and preservation needs among the scheduled caste fishing communities in Assam. So whereas in Bengal, the blood-based preparations, rakti or bird fly, often with goat or other offal. So these preparations highlights nutritional thrifts in Dalit households, which directly challenges the so-called purity norms while trying to informal meat economies. So this framework underscores the originality by centering unexplored regions and their practices and habits, which reveals the food as both oppressive and emancipatory by challenging in everyday practices at their cooking places. So when it comes to methodological details of a particular study, so we adopted an interdisciplinary qualitative methodology to examine intersections of food, caste hierarchy, and Dalit assertion in India with a regional focus on Assam and Bengal. So drawing from sociology, anthropology, cultural studies, and Dalit studies, so we try to combine textual analysis with ethnographic inquiry to explore food as a site of both caste reproduction and resistance. So this approach enables grounded understanding of culinary practices as everyday technologies of power. So while foregrounding subaltern voices often marginalized in the dominant academic narratives. So therefore, it becomes very important that the scholars and their vantage point, their experiential learning, as well as their ideological commitments while studying any particular social life, especially the Dalit life. So the primary methods includes analysis and ethnographic research. The textual analysis involves very close reading of Dalit autobiographies, literary writings, and oral narratives that document experiences of food-based exclusion and assertion. So in Bengal, works by authors such as Manoranjan Baipari and Kalyani Thakur provide insight into caste stigma surrounding beef consumption among Namasudra communities. So while in Assam, available scheduled caste writings and oral accounts are examined to understand the practices such as fermented fish and pork consumption among Karbarta and Mahara groups. So these materials were thematically analyzed to identify recurring patterns of purity pollution, stigma, culinary resistance, informed by subaltern historiography. So while the ethnographic data were collected through semi-structured interviews and limited participant observations, so a total of 20 Dalit respondents, 10 from each state, were selected using purposive sampling to ensure diversity across gender, age, and socioeconomic backgrounds. We took proper care to ensure this representativeness of the sample. And the field sites included rural areas where the Dalit communities lives in Assam, and urban as well as peri-urban regions where Namasudras localities in West Bengal. So where interviews were focused on everyday cooking practices, experiences of dietary surveillance, and strategies of culinary assertions. So all the interviews were conducted with taking care of ethical considerations of informed consent and recorded, transcribed, and translated wherever necessary. So in addition to interviews, the study draws on oral histories and selected digital archives, including Dalit online platforms and social media content related to beef politics and regional food practices. So these sources provided contemporary perspectives on food-based activism and cultural visibility. So while the study focuses primarily on scheduled castes and limited sample size, this scope enables depth rather than generalizations. So that's where the contribution of this particular volume we envision. So despite these limitations, the methodology effectively support the study's objectives of documenting unexplored regional Dalit food culture and analyzing their role in challenging taste hierarchies in India. So having explained the methodology, so let me come now to the data analysis part. So this particular section we are divided into four themes on the basis of which we systematically analyze the collected data. So first theme we demarcated as historical hierarchies and institutionalization of food inequality. So in Bengal, as well as in Assam, where we collected data, so the hierarchies were further consolidated during the colonial period on the basis of historical ancient prescriptions in Manusmriti and other Dharmasastric traditions and textual sources. So that continues even today. The rise of upper castes in Bengal, the so-called Bhadralok elite institutionalized vegetarianism, respectably as a sign of refinement, civility, and moral superiority. So while this Bhadralok and their continuous surveillance of lower caste meat consumption, especially the beef, it serves as a method of social differentiation. The historical records indicates the Dalit communities such as Namasudra were systematically excluded from the shared meals during the public gatherings, religious ceremonies, and community feasts, which reinforces their symbolic and the spatial marginalization and everyday lives. So while in Assam, the food-based exclusion intersects with both castes and ethnic hierarchies. The scheduled caste groups, such as Karbarta, traditionally engaged in fishing. So this particular occupation we see in various states handled by, in some state, the OBC communities, but in this case, the scheduled caste, the occupation is fishing. They faces restrictions on access to shared water bodies and fish resources, and those deemed ritually pure are being excluded. Those spaces, the access to those spaces are being systematically excluded. So the pre-colonial and colonial records demonstrates how dominant caste Assamese groups exercise control over riverine ecologies, denying Dalits access to communal ponds, and fishing grounds. So whereas beef stigma further compounded these exclusions. Although Assam's cultural landscape include diverse meat-eating traditions influenced by tribal communities, the Dalit beef consumption was persistently vilified as uncivilized. So this vilification intensified in the post-1947 period with growing influence of Hindu nationalist ideology. And that continues in the contemporary legal interventions, most notably the recent Assam government's 2021 Cattle Protection Act, banning beef in Hindu majority areas, reproduce historical inequality under the guise of legality. This disproportionately affecting Dalit livelihoods within informal meat markets. So these policies generate a kind of layered forms of share, self-surveillance, and internalized discrimination, which directly affect that continue to manifest in the modern institutions such as schools, workplaces, and the universities, other public places. So another theoretical framework, the theme, which helps us to analyze the data we collected is the everyday experience and the reproduction of caste through food. The ethnographic narratives from Dalit men and women in both the states, Assam and Bengal, which reveals how historical food hierarchies are reproduced in everyday life through subtle, not direct, but subtle routine practices. So various interviews in our study highlights it, how segregation operates not only through explicit prohibition, but through spatial organization, like different spaces for different communities, and behavioral monitoring, and effective discipline. So from households to public areas, food emerged as a persistent marker through which castes difference is continually reaffirmed. So Dalit women experiences, as we mentioned, our methodology that we emphasized looking at the gender aspect within the Dalit, where Dalit women experience these exclusions most acutely as kitchen becomes the site of both coercion as well as cultural preservation. So in our study, Namasudra women from Bengal describes being compelled to cook in isolated corners of shared households to avoid contaminating the so-called pure places and the utensils of other communities. So while maintaining traditional bee preparations within private space, she simultaneously navigated pressure to adopt vegetarian practices to secure social acceptance. So such negotiations, it's not easy anywhere. The women has to negotiate. So such negotiations reveal the gendered labor of managing stigma, where women bear responsibility for sustaining culinary heritage under the constant scrutiny, very often facing verbal abuse, very common, or exclusion from the community meals. So the material consequences of such exclusions are profound. One cannot really ignore. So dependence on offal, discarded meat, and marginal food sources shapes nutrition, market access, and bodily health. So in Assam, the Dalit women whom we interviewed reported reliance on fermented fish sourced from peripheral markets, contributing to nutritional deficiencies such as anemia due to limited protein diversity. So in Bengal, Dalit engaged in informal labor encounter economic barriers to fresh produce, compelling dependence on the traditional dietary habits that ensure survival while inviting social shame. Yet, these narratives also reveal from the various forms of tactical resistance, not just one-way process of only facing the shame. So covert meal sharing within Dalits only spaces, which is very rare though, even in modern spaces. So those spaces transforms imposed exclusion into collective solidarity. We can see on everyday basis, it might happen to some of us at least here. So such practices dominates that everyday food consumption is not merely reactive, but politically generative. So socio-culturally, these acts reaffirm our identity. Economically, they reflect adaptive strategies under deprivation. And politically, they contribute to emerging demands for food justice and dignity. The another theme we analyze this particular data is the culinary practices as sites of resistance. So several under-documented food practices in both the states exemplify Dalit ingenuity and resilience, challenging dominant purity norms while anchoring cultural memory. So in Assam, Oma Bedor, a smoked pork, the dish name Oma Bedor, a smoked pork preparation with black sesame, features prominently among the scheduled caste communities such as Mahara, prepared by smoking pork over wood fire and blending it with the sesame paste, ginger, and chilies. The dish reflects adaptive strategies shaped by economic scarcity and preservation needs. So these ethnographic observations indicate that Mahara households consciously sustained the dish as a mark of identity, particularly in the face of increasing vegetarian moralizations. So in contemporary debate surrounding meat bans, this particular dish functions as a quiet yet powerful assertion of cultural autonomy. Similarly, the fermented bamboo shoot curries, prepared by soaking shoots in the water before cooking them with the fish or pork, illustrate culinary knowledge rooted in riverine ecologies Among the Dalit fishing communities, these dishes rely on foraged ingredients and low-cost resources, countering scarcity while defying upper caste disdain for strong-smelling foods. So the stigma attached to the fermented reveals how sensory judgments themselves operate as a caste markers. So therefore, they try to define what is the taste, which state must be consumed. Yet, for the Dalit community, such foods embody ecological intelligence, cultural continuity, and the sense of fight. This linking the socio-cultural identity and economic necessity as well as the political resistance. So whereas in Bengal, Raktabaza, the blood fry, exemplifies extreme culinary marginalization and creative survival. So using coagulated animal blood discarded by markets, the Namashudra household transform what is deemed impure into nutritious dish. So the practice directly confronts purity ideology by reclaiming bodily substances cast as taboo, asserting the legitimacy of Dalit life worlds against the dominant moral regimes. And the food items such as beef and the simmered with spices, potatoes, further demonstrate this resistance. The way of preparing itself is one set of resisting the existing practice. So prepared using affordable versilla obtained through informal markets, the dish sustains community bonds while openly defying beef stigma. So such foods reveal how economic marginality intersects with political defense, situating everyday cooking within broader struggles over legality, dignity, and the sense of belonging. And the final frame of analysis in our study is emerging counter discourse and food as political assertion. The recent developments indicated a significant transformation in the politics of food, where ordinary culinary practices once used to mark caste exclusion are increasingly mobilized as instrument of political resistance. Rather than remaining confined to stigma and silence, food has emerged as a language through which Dalit communities articulate dignity, memory, and collective resistance. So in Bengal, the Dalit-led beef festivals exemplify this particular shift from marginalization to the assertion. So not only we see this in the southern parts, but also there. So various times, the recent times where they proposed the beef festivals, like various universities here in southern India. Although those initiatives many a time are being cancelled following the threats and political pressure, so which itself symbolizes a collective refusal of dietary moral policing. So drawing inspiration from earlier initiatives at southern parts, like famously Usmania University in Hyderabad. So such gatherings foreground Dalit labor within the beef economy, which challenges the ideological framing of beef consumption as deviant. So by repositioning beef as a marker of identity rather than transgression, so these events expose how caste power operates through control over food choices and bodily autonomy. Similarly, in Assam, counter discourse emerges less through public gatherings and more through digital spaces. It's very interesting dynamic. Not necessarily you mobilize there, but you shift to other alternative forums where you express yourself. By expressing, you deviate and you resist. The special media platforms like particularly YouTube have become crucial arenas for the cultural reclamation. So Dalits and various other communities documents the preparation of fermented fish, pork-based dishes, reviving the culinary traditions historically stigmatized as uncivilized and unhygienic. So we have shared in our write-up various references to videos and various other documents. So this helps us to study systematically how the resistance is taking place and occupying various non-academic spaces as sites of resistance. So to make it a little short, let me come to some discussion on the findings and then I will conclude in a few minutes. So some of the significant aspects which emerges in this particular study, both Assam and Bengal. So some of the parallels exist in both the states, where fermented and smoked food operates as both survival strategies and cultural assertions. So among the Dalit communities in Assam, as well as in Bengal. So by changing the way of preparing itself as a resistance. So the another significant finding, the concerns the gendered reproduction of food hierarchies. The Dalit women occupy a structurally paradoxical position as both custodian of culinary heritage and primary negotiators of caste surveillance. So in Bengal, the Namasudra women described preparing rakta bosa within segregated domestic spaces to avoid contaminating shared kitchens. So comparable patterns emerge in Assam where the Dalit women recounted concealing fermented foods in hostels or working places governed by upper castes dietary norms. Therefore, one has to conceal what you are bringing, what you are eating. So this institutional vegetarianism in educational and occupational spaces frequently result in nutritional compromise. So various scholars studied this aspect. So reinforcing bodily vulnerability and symbolic humiliation on daily basis. So these experiences reveal that caste is reproduced not only through public exclusion, but through domestic regulation and gendered sacrifice. At the same time, women's covert cooking practices, collective feasts, and intergenerational knowledge sharing constitutes the forms of everyday resistance. So linking personal survival strategies to broader feminist and anti-caste politics. So therefore, the findings underscores that analysis of food and caste remains incomplete without sustained attention to gendered power. So our study also identifies significant policy implications. The existing food governance framework, such as public distribution system and school midday meal schemes, very often universalize dominant caste dietary norms, where the privileged vegetarian or sanitized food models while excluding meat, fermented items, and regionally specific diets. So in Assam and Bengal, such exclusion disproportionately affects scheduled caste communities whose nutritional needs and cultural practice falls outside the so-called normative policy imaginaries. So the findings suggest that the need for inclusive food policies that recognize Dalit culinary diversity as legitimate rather than deviant. So this policy interventions must extend nutritional inclusion to address food-based discrimination itself, expanding the scope of anti-untouchability legislations to include culinary surveillance, exclusion from shared eating spaces, and institutional dietary coercion that would acknowledge food as a site of caste violence. So additionally, targeted support for Dalit food entrepreneurship through street vending protection, market access, digital visibility that could strengthen economic autonomy while affirming cultural legitimacy. So overall, the findings affirms that while food remains a powerful medium through which caste hierarchy is sustained, Dalit culinary practices in Assam and Bengal generates meaningful pathways of resistance. So these practices reconfigure food from a marker of stigma into a vehicle of memory, survival, and political imagination. So by foregrounding regional diversity, gendered experiences, and everyday agency, the study calls for a fundamental rethinking of food, not as a neutral cultural domain, but a critical site for advancing social equality and social justice. So now I come to conclude. So what are attempts in this particular paper is try to contribute is that the food reveals about caste, the various practices as we discussed here, which law alone cannot solve the problem of this systematized discrimination. So therefore, what we need is law may prohibit untouchability, yet disgust, shape the moral policing, continue to regulate the Dalit bodies through food. So the commensality bans, like banning the shared meal practices, dietary surveillance, and the criminalization of certain meats illustrates how caste adopts, embedding itself within the social norms. The long after Constitution legally abolishes untouchability. So the food thus exposes the limits of judicial solutions, revealing castes as a lived structure reproduced through habits rather than statutes. So Dalit food practices, however, offer an alternative imagination of equality. Dishes such as Oma Bedo, Rakta Bhaja are not merely responses to poverty, but acts of creative refusal. So they reclaim ingredients deemed impure, asserting the legitimacy of Dalit life worlds against dominant caste aesthetics. Through cooking, sharing, vending, and digital circulation, all those aspects have come predominantly in this study. The Dalit communities reconstitute dignity on their own terms. So these culinary practices teach that equality is not only about access to resources, but about right to define value, tastes, and humanity itself. So by integrating Ambedkarite thought with the conceptual framework of culinary casteism, this particular study positions food as central, not supplementary to anti-caste struggle. So Ambedkar's insistence on cultural revolution finds resonance here. Alienation of caste requires transforming everyday practices that normalize hierarchy. So Dalit cuisines thus emerge as political texts through which resistance is enacted not only in protest spaces, but within kitchens, markets, as well as communal meals. So the findings also underscores the urgency of food justice as a political and ethical project. Institutional reform must move beyond uniform welfare models that privilege dominant caste food norms. Inclusive food policies should recognize these regional and caste-specific dietary practices, protect livelihoods, tries to stigmatize foods, address violence linked to meat consumptions. Yet, policy alone is insufficient. So we argue cultural transformation through education, representation, and public discourse is equally necessary to dismantle the moral hierarchies that sustain caste privilege. So our study in Bengal and Assam, supporting Dalit-led food festivals, culinary archives, the digital storytelling platforms can foster recognition, empathy, and social repair. So looking forward, future research may extend this inquiry into urban Dalit food entrepreneurship, tracing how migration, market visibility, and digital economy may reshape culinary assertions. So comparative regional studies and longitudinal ethnographics could further illuminate how food practices evolve in response to political change and policy intervention. So such work is not merely academic. It carries the potential to contribute to broader struggles for dignity and belonging. So ultimately, this study affirms that imagining equality requires listening to what Dalit food teaches us, that justice must be lived, tested, and shared. Food reveals castes where law remains silent, demands cultural transformation, where policy reaches its limits, and offers everyday practices through which more egalitarian futures can be imagined. Thank you, JB. I'll stop here.
Okay. Thank you, Santosh. It was very systematic with a lot of conceptual clarity. So many issues you brought for the discussion. Now I also request Ratan Sarkar to say anything you would like to share. Then we will go for discussion. Ratan.
Yeah, so thank you, Santosh. I think you have done justice to what we plan to deliver, and we have taken much time. It's around 7:20. Yeah, so I really second the thought, and I hope the platform can be open for further discussion. We also are in a position to learn and take of the feedbacks for further improvement in our work. Just one line I would like to add on to what, in addition to what Santosh said, that the work is not completely academic. It is something beyond that, and the precise and the simple takeaway from our paper can be summarized as like to inherit caste, we must transform not only laws and institutions or policies, but we also think of kitchen taste and everyday moral judgment sort of mechanism. So I think this can be the takeaway of our work, and I hope the platform is now open for further discussion. Yeah, thank you. Please.
So thank you, Thank you, Ratan. So now floor is open for the discussion. You can directly write your questions, queries to both speakers, or you can unmute and ask.
Hello.
Please.
Can I ask the question?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I think you're mute. Hi, you are not audible. Yeah.
Somebody can ask meanwhile. Anybody. Anybody? I think there are messages also. You can read it. Hmm?
Question is not believing at least.
Anybody? Ratan,
Hello.
anything you want to?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
What is the environmental politic of the collector facility? Sorry?
Yeah. Can you repeat, please? Yeah.
Oh, yes. What is the collective possibility of the phonetic project?
So I suggest you to type your question. Please type your question and send. He may be asking that what are the policy level corrections to address this food hierarchies? Am I right?
I think so. Santosh, would you like to go ahead with answer?
Yeah. So as we discussed at the end of the paper, some of the recommendations to the policy changes that has to be democratized. I mean, though the so-called modern institutions They claim that they are caste neutral or culture neutral, but continues to promote kind of prioritizing particular way of eating and food, what we see in PDS as well as midday meal schemes, and even some of the university spaces where everyday contestations we see that how students are being segregated in their messes to separate tables, separate space, etc. So at policy level, there is a lot of things to do. I mean, it's not just about these practices of food supply and other things, but consistent, comprehensive intervention is required at policy level. I mean, that requires a lot of commitment and the shared vision of diversity of food. So some of these, I mean, we can talk of, but it can be imagined in different and region-specific ways in which the people of that particular region may know better that what suits, what is the food diversities exist there, and policymakers must recognize those and promote. Thank you for that. Ratan, would you like to add something?
Yeah, so I feel like in addition to what you said, a few more sort of things should be there in the policy, aspect. Like there should be policy in place which recognize and recognize and prohibit food-based discrimination in institution. For example, in hostels or workplace or in schools, or it can be at university level also. And then we talk about curriculum, like culturally responsive teaching or curriculum in education, but we really do negotiate with when we talk about food culture. So I think that can become a part of the policy aspect, and through that the debate and discussion on the aspect of having a right to choose food and right to have a kind of specific test should also be in the curriculum. I think that sort of modifications are required. Another aspect is like ensure food policies are participated. Like we do decide like some food as normal or accepted by people at large, or we can say like by some food as pure, and and that notion is accepted by people at large or people in position with power. And so the question arises like who decide like what is pure and what is not pure. So I think that sort of discourse should be participatory in nature, and that sort of narration should be formed based on a kind of dialogue which is participatory in nature. So these are the things I think that can be addressed through policy reformations. Yeah.
Anybody? Okay, so did you come across, or what is your understanding of diversity of food practices and its functioning of hierarchies among the Dalits? So how do we understand it within the Dalits, whether it is in Assam or West Bengal?
Ratan, will you take?
Yeah. Yeah, so with regard to Bengal, I'd like to give you an example. Like, if you look into the food practices of Namashudra community, which belongs to Dalit community, would say, and the way the kind of food practice they do have, is many times termed as filthy, not culturally accepted and respected in a broader community, quote and unquote, called Vatrulok in Bengali. Okay, so that sort of things are there actually. So based on food, like what kind of food I take, what sort of food I take, based on that, many time, concept about my identities are formed. So, and again, that identity decides a social identity has a kind of social structure, uh, like the structure decided by people in power. So I feel like food can decide a kind of structure, and the structure can be a aspect for discrimination. uh, that is what is the submission I think I can make in this context. Anything, Santosh, you'd like to add on from the perspective of Assam?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Chandraya, for that question. We see that at the surface level, it looks uniform as far as the food cultures of the so-called marginalized people are concerned. But when we explore at deeper levels, we can see that within the Dalit communities, certain hierarchies, not exactly the way it functions, that of Dalit and non-Dalit, but due to geographical and economic, as well as other statuses, the various changes of food practices among the Dalit can also be seen, right? So that not predominantly coming out in the field studies where we conducted in Bengal and Assam, but my limited understanding of the places like Andhra and Telangana, we can see that. So the margins marginalized within the margins, and their practices are different, right? So therefore, the uniformity may not be exist across the communities. So hierarchies at multiple levels needs to be studied. It's not one layer. There are multiple layers to the idea of hierarchies as far as the food is concerned. So it's not therefore only about beef and the other items of food will come into. So therefore, the scholars who are studying the food cultures among the margins need to be more careful in bringing out the diversities of food cultures and the knowledge of various preparations of those foods. So must be studied in a deeper way. So for our study, that is not we have witnessed, but maybe in the future studies can elaborate and expand the sample size and the different geographical locations, and further in-depth analysis can be done. I mean, I'm sure there can be diversities of the so-called hierarchies must exist in the regions where we are studying. Thank you for that question.
Good. So, and furthering this discussion in terms of diversities, in your observations or in your study, both in Assam and West Bengal, how does this hierarchy of veg and non-veg within the Dalit communities works? Is it because of the religious practice, or is it because of the imitation of the upper caste? Is it because of the sects, cultural practices within the Dalits? How do we understand this very formation of vegetarianism and its everyday functioning within the communities?
Ratan, would you take?
Sorry.
Please unmute.
Yeah, I couldn't get actually. There was some internet issue. What was the matter? Yeah, what is the question, Santosh? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
there is
the question is this emerging practices of
vegetarianism.
vegetarianism among
Yeah.
the various Dalit communities, on what basis that this new trend is emerging. So based on various sects or religious persuasions or any other maybe the probable reasons as to diversities of food cultures among the Dalits in Bengal and Assam.
So we have not explored this much in a detailed manner in our study, but I think there are some reflections that we have recorded in our work, like in Bengal, with from the perspective of Bengal, we understood like uh, the veg is somehow treated as something pure, and non-veg in some communities it is treated as not pure, right? And that again, the pureness and the purity and impurity of a food define the base for further discrimination. That is what we experienced actually, like that is how the system is there. But yeah, in our study we have not covered this much. We can take it as a delimitation part of our work, and we can look into it if there is a scope. Yeah.
So I think this is a very important aspect of the food diversities as we claim. So I mean, for the scholars to study this further, I mean, we need a separate paper on this. I mean, it's very interesting aspect. Thank you for that, Professor Chandraya. So I agree that, I mean, this needs a thorough investigation as to the so-called hierarchies, as we mentioned earlier, as well as the new emerging cultures of vegetarianism and other practices. So among these various Dalit communities, that becomes very, very interesting study. So that is, I mean, not part of our particular emphasis, but that deserves to be very in-depth intervention by the scholars. Thank you.
Any question, queries? If there are no questions, and we can conclude. And
So, thank you so much for this insightful lecture, Dr. Santosh ji and Dr. Ratan Sarkar. So you two people have brought in the various aspects related to the food cultures. And I have a very small question regarding this. When you talk about various culinary practices and Dalit cuisines like Uma Bedor in your region and in West Bengal especially, so what is your take about uh, 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 the animal ethics, especially the people belonging to mainstream most often raise this question when we talk about Dalit food cultures. So Dalit food cultures has always been questioned in terms of animal ethics. So is there any way to address this question? What is your take on that, sir?
Ratan?
I think you must go ahead with this. Yeah.
So the protectors and the lovers of animal rights do have right to argue and put forward their position, right? So, but for understanding that this is co-living as co-habitants of the world, I mean, on the earth, we must have to respect the rights of all the species, including the the so-called animals, right? So, but the question is not that simple. It's a deeper question. I mean, needs a critical lens to address this particular aspect, right? So, I mean, whether animals only have the life or the plants does have any life, right? So therefore, the people who promote the vegetarianism and eating various types of grass, so I mean, this can be problematized by posing counter questions and deeper analysis, right? So having said that, we are not really arguing against any claims, the legitimate claims rather, of the rights of various animals.
So
Yes,
in addition to that, may I add something? Actually, it's very interesting. So we are talking about animal ethics, and most of the time with the food practice of the lead community and tribal people, basically this question comes in place. Again, I have a question on the question actually. So, like, who's decide on the animal ethics, and why it is only limited to certain animal, and why it is not limited to other? Like we can take example of, like, eating chicken, right? We don't have a problem with that. But when we talk about beef and we talk about pork, then the ethics comes. Now again, I think the process or mechanism of deciding on animal ethics should be relooked, should be reviewed. I think it can be a subject for debate and subject for review, like how it is done and who has done it, and who's power, what sort of power dynamic work into that practice. Practice means work into that process of deciding on animal ethics. And if really the food practice of this Dalit community has an issue with regard to animal ethics, then why the food practice of other people, right? Where again, the subject is related to killing animals, right? Subject of food is related to killing an animal is out of question. So I feel like this can go for further exploration and further debate, further discussion, right? So that is what the aspect from my end. However, again, I took this question also as a kind of delimitation of our concentration, because we have not looked into and we have not much data. We have not collected any data on it. But yeah, that's a good question. We'll take it forward in future. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Santosh, Juvvaka, and thank you, Dr. Ratan Sarkar. So we feel this discussion and the presentation really enrich us. We also feel that it will be more helpful people who are working on Dalit food cultures, in particular food cultures in general, and the comparative mode of presenting Dalit food cultures from West Bengal and Assam is very, very interesting. And also the point that you emphasized, how everyday practices are normalized, and annihilation of caste is something we have to interrogate this normalization. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to understand the larger, deeper structures of annihilating the caste. And food is the center point. Though Ambedkar, for his entire analysis, how he also seen food, how it become important historically for the emergence of untouchability and other caste practices. For a long time, it is not paid much attention, and recently this Dalit food culture become a scholarly interest, and after particularly Sahu Patole work, some new generation of scholars are taking up, and there is a need to go long way. So this project of bringing edited volumes on Dalit food cultures, we thought it will be really helpful in generating public discussion, scholarly interest among the new generation of scholars. And the way you presented and already submitted paper definitely enriches, and further we can improve. And with this note, we are very thankful. I formally invite uh, Devshish to propose vote of thanks. Devshish.
A very good evening, all of you. Hello. So, first of all, we as a Satyashoda Collective wants to thanks to Dr. Santosh and Dr. Ratan sir for your presence, and thank you so much for thank you so much to Dr. Santosh for a very beautifully systematic presentation. We have learned quite some new thoughts, new innovative ideas, especially concept about the culinary casteism, which is a very thought-provoking concept, and I'll really interested to read the read your paper. And apart from this, your region, West Bengal and Assam, is very interesting choice because there are so many parallels between Bengal and Assam, and you have taken this two region and you have presented the presentation. So it was a very interesting to hear your thoughts, and especially uh, your Dr. Santosh first argued that we can food as an alternative imagination of equality is a very refreshing thing to hear because in general sense food is a very important and integral part, and it is in certain Dalit communities food is a very food is attached to as a stigma and stereotypes. So it will be very interesting to see that can food be become an alternative imagination and can be proceed can be move towards us and an egalitarian society. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Santosh and Dr. Ratan, for the presentation. And apart from this, there was a technical glitches. So yeah, we have taken the notes and will improve the technical obstacles. And with that, thank you so much to the listeners to being here. We'll conduct more lectures on this topic and on this culture practices. So you can follow our Facebook page and our YouTube page so that you can get our update and our next lecture. So thank you so much, and thank you so much to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.